Alright folks, this is a series I've been promising for a long time. I won't exactly be able to see what I'm recording, but I've got it set up to record my face and also the stuff that I'm doing on the computer at the same time. I'm using some hotkeys, so I have no idea how they'll act with code. I don't know if code has any keybinds, but I don't think so. Um, I've just been I wanted to get something out finally. It's taken me forever to finally do this. Maybe I'll get to upload it before the end of the day, and honestly, I never know when the internet's going to go out, but we'll find out, won't we? Oh, okay. I guess it's bound to search. That's a little annoying. Um, yeah, code. Didn't know about any keybinds. Doesn't matter if it does. I just wanted to show people how to get started on a project. I have no idea what people's setups are going to be. I'm kind of in the understanding that if you're programming to any extent, or if you want to learn programming, you've maybe seen tutorials on how to set up a workspace. Like if you're on Windows, you want like Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code with like compilers you found on the internet. Or if you're on Linux, it's usually a lot easier. You just kind of install the tools you need, and Linux usually has a lot of tools built in that let you make what you need to make. I'm going to be using CMake, and obviously because I'm using CMake Easy, and yeah, I do just run it on my system, even if it's kind of a mess. But we'll get something together. I'll show you guys how to go through this process step by step, just starting with actual programming, no setup. I'm going to assume you know how to do that. So there's no official standard on how to start a C++ project, and um, I mean, in my case, all I've ever done is I just create a source folder and then I create an include folder. And trust me when I say I've seen programmers just throw header files and HPP files into the source folder and assume it's functional. And while that's technically correct, a lot of times it also creates a lot of backlogged problems. Headers do not act well when you have to jump around between a lot of files and they're all clustered in different places. If you have your header files with all your source files, you usually have other problems down the line, so please don't do that if you can avoid it. Um, the more standard way of doing it is usually just have an include folder or just a special folder where non-source related stuff is kept, because all the header files really do is they make sure the source files have context to work with, more or less. Alright, I'm going to start where you should always start in C++. You should really start with your main file. And being the weirdo that I am, I usually start it with capitalization. And this is not mandatory by any means. You can also just type it like lowercase like that as your file name. But the generally accepted way is lowercase, but I like to defy convention in that way. It really doesn't matter. As long as you tell whatever you're compiling with, what your actual starting file is, you could just use that. It doesn't even have to be named main. That's just standard and less confusing. You can also just have it as the name of the actual program you're intending to write. So say you want to just call it program, that's fine too. But it's usually easier to just use main. Ah, open to find again. Anyway, as you may have noticed, it's already complaining at me that there's nothing there. Um, I don't know if this is a problem specific to code. It usually doesn't bother you for just having a blank slate. The point is that your whatever text editor you're using, if it's specifically built for programming, it usually notifies you of errors even when there's almost nothing going on. And if it's like code, then it'll update randomly, sometimes even slowly, and show you problems that have already been fixed. So just be wary of that. You can see the red squiggly lines show up even though you've already fixed the problem. And it's just that it varies a lot between differing text editors. Alright, I talked a lot about... Fine. Anyway, I've talked a lot about how to set the file up, but I haven't really shown you anything. So let's start with the most basic step in all of C++ programming, including a system file that will allow you to tap into the system's pre-written C++ headers. IOStream, pretty basic, just means you're accessing the input-output stream. It's a specially written file for C++, and the reason I'm going into detail explaining what that does is because it's actually really important. It defines C++ from C. Basically, just your standard inputs, your standard outputs. If you write cin and you just say some value, this is a bad example. um, you know, anytime you have to do a command like that, it's just part of the input-output stream. Alright, let's go ahead and get started with the main part of C++. And just like C programs, you're always going to start with an int main function. And if you're wondering what int is and why it has to come first, int main is basically just the most standard program that you can start with. It's a predefined function that basically just says if you're returning a value other than 0, somewhere in the execution went wrong. And so it's always going to return an int, and an int is just an integer, which means it can't be a floating point number, it can't be anything fancy. And though I don't know if anybody's ever tried to use something like float main or whatever, I don't think I'd advise it. You really just want to use int main and return a standard number, and you always want your execution to end with 0 because it's equivalent to saying 0 problems. Alright, now that I've gotten all that out of the way, we're going to start with some tutorials to show you how to start with maybe like functions or just running int main by itself, but I'd rather you kind of understand what the program's actually doing as it's running. Say you want a whole number, an integer, just say int num. And in a lot of cases where you initialize, which is to say you put the number in the program to be used, initialization. If you're starting the number with no preset value, you usually have garbage in there. So say if I had just put int num and didn't add anything to it, what the program would produce, because I didn't assign it a value, is basically just a random string of who knows what. Because the program really needs a reference point. It's basically just creating a spot in the memory temporarily for this integer to be processed. But you didn't tell it to do anything. You didn't tell it what it was supposed to be valued at. So it just creates something out of thin air. Probably an old value that was in that position before. That has a lot to do with memory and the stack. I'm not going to be getting into that. That's really advanced stuff. But just in case, if you ever really just initialize something, and let's say you use cout just to see what that number is. Alright, let me demonstrate real quick. The benefit of already having like a Linux system is that it's usually pretty program friendly. When you want to make stuff, it's built in, like I said before. So you just, if you're in VS Code, just go to new terminal. I don't know why I opened 2 or 3. Let me get rid of a few of these. I've done this take a few times now. But basically, watch this. I'm in the right folder, right? I try to output a program. Whatever you want the program's name to be, you just type that as the output here. You see how that's -O? That actually means output, and it means that the program name is being produced. And then you add the files that you want to link to it, essentially. And in this case, it doesn't work because I'm not in the source folder. I'm still in the main project folder. And even though these things can be linked up from this position, they're not going to work normally. So you just cd into src, clear that, and try it again. You do the output file, a little bit of a mistake there, and suddenly you notice it has created a program with main. And that's only possible because you're not linking it from like a base folder, you're inside the source folder, directly telling the program, oh hey, it's right here. Use this to make the program. And as things get more complex, you will be able to essentially use G++ or CMake to build all the system files you need to create the program itself. Where that program will be built will be a matter of what compilation method you use, and in my case I'll be using CMake. But you will have to tell the program where the folder or area that you want the program to be compiled. Jumping off from that point, it's actually an excellent chance to prove that this isn't necessarily a built-in program. Built-in problem. I am just stumbling over myself today. What you can do is you can still use the G++ command to output a program file. And let's say you switch it up a bit. Do source and then do main. And then you notice that's weird. It actually recognizes what you told it to do, because what it's basically doing is it's kind of operating from what's called a working directory. Your working directory is very important. You need to understand that if you're using something like Bash or command line, even in Windows, it can only really do things within that folder that you have it set to at the time. So if you tell G++ is like, hey, I need you to make program, but this is the folder that it's in, it's not in the one that I'm trying to use. So it's like, oh, okay, I understand now. I was looking in the wrong place for that. Because when you use a command like pwd or dir, you'll notice that, you know, I don't mean to give away my system name here, but yeah, it's gonna reference wherever the folder that's not quite the source. It's like the containing folder of your source and your include. Even more importantly than all that, though, we need to get rid of, as you may have noticed, there are two programs now. Let's say you ls the src or dir the src, depending on what setup you're using. Well, you really just want to delete that file. You can either delete it from your text editor, or you can you know, go and delete it manually with your file explorer. It doesn't really matter. Alright, I'm going to demonstrate a few different problems with this program. Because int was never initialized to an actual number, it'll probably be 0 or complete garbage. And I've just compiled it, so what it should do, you know, as I've just shown earlier. Oh, also I added the namespace, which is standard, which makes it so you don't actually need the standard declaration there. But in the case if you're using multiple namespaces, like, I don't know, just like namespace SF or something. That's if you're using SFML, really. But you really don't want to do it that way. It's better to be very explicit in your declarations so things don't get muddled. You don't end up using similar functions for the wrong purposes, and boy can that cause problems. But anyway, the way the program is set now, num's not initialized. It's not going to do what you would expect it to do. You try and run program, it just gives you a 0, or it'll give you some garbage. So what you need to do is you make sure the num has an escape character, which would be like n or shoot, endl. Yeah, endl is pretty much the equivalent to n, but it's a little less reliable. But it ultimately doesn't matter. It just creates output issues depending on what you've done. So I'm actually assigning num to something here. And it changes the behavior of the program dramatically, because now you know, you've set the num to something, it's 5, and you told it to escape here, which means it's going to jump down to the next line when you display it. And then it has to return 0. It's like everything's fine, everything executed the way it was supposed to. This is a really, really basic explanation of like the bare bones for getting a C++ program working. And like I've said before, you usually don't want to actually use namespaces. You want to be declarative. and just tell it you want cout. You want standard cout. Because sometimes namespaces can, I've already said it, namespaces can reuse similar words or even the exact same words. Make sure you know what you're doing. In this case, it doesn't matter. But the reason I'm being so insistent about this is because it'll create better programming habits down the line for if you decide to stick with C++. Um, you just want to make sure that you have your values initialized, you know what the output's going to produce, and that you don't have errors. And um, it will get a lot more complex from here on out, but this is just, I just wanted to show what these programs are supposed to do and give an idea of what programming in C++ is like on the most basic level. As the programs get more complicated, I'll make sure to walk through and show people how that's done.